Hi everyone, my name is Daniel. I am the APAC Content Marketing Evangelist Manager for LinkedIn. What is a content marketing evangelist? Essentially what we do is we run like I guess like an agency consulting and strategy team within LinkedIn. And what we do is we really sort of service LinkedIn's top tier clients on their content marketing efforts and their strategy themselves. So we don't just talk about LinkedIn. What we do is we really help a lot of those clients to just be more effective with social media. We even go broader than that and look at their ad tech and their martech and a lot of other different things there too. I manage across the APAC region, so in my team I have people in Sydney, I have people in India, I have people in China, people in Singapore. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Tremaine. So I'm a Senior Social Director for Digitas. Digitas is part of the Publicis Group in Singapore. I look after actually the Southeast Asia region. So Senior Social Director is a title, and I guess it alludes to just looking after kind of social, but I guess social content marketing is more than just a post or a piece of content that goes up on a platform. It's everything from the strategy and the research behind it, the analytics, the media monitoring, then the creative itself, and then obviously the execution and reporting. So I currently look after that for Digitas Southeast Asia, but the most exciting part is actually my client, my biggest client, and it's the Walt Disney Company. To you, Joe.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe, and I'm a senior intern at no, I'm just kidding. So I own a company, and what we do is we help a lot of organizations, mostly larger organizations, with their content marketing. So that encompasses everything from strategy to creation to measurement, and we look after clients around the world. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you again, Joe, Tremaine, and Daniel, for being here and taking the time out of your busy lives and to be a part of this panel discussion with Vente Consulting. So a bit about myself. My name is Pinar, and I'm going to be a moderator this evening. I'm from the School of Business, and I've just completed year 2. So to quickly run through the program for today, we'll be starting with the panel discussion right after this, followed up by an audience Q&A, and we'll have a break in the middle. So that's for about 5 minutes, just for water. There will also be a chance to network at the very end if time, availability, and energy of the panelists permit.
Probably not, guys. Sorry.
That's too bad then, I guess. But yeah, so that could be a chance for those of you interested to interacting with the panelists and to ask them any burning questions. So to kick off this panel discussion, I would like to actually talk about the survey you guys just did. So survey results show, so the first question was, have you ever struggled with creating good content? And in brackets, it was be honest. So 98% said yes. One respondent said no.
Wow.
Anybody like
take my seat.
Who was? Okay.
It wasn't me.
Stand-up comedian over there is killing it.
Yeah. So I would like to throw some quick statistics. So Forbes reports that we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data per day. And to put this in perspective, for every minute that passes globally, 4 million YouTube videos are watched, 120 professionals join LinkedIn, and Instagram users post 50,000 photos. So the point is that there is an enormous amount of content created and consumed each day, with reducing attention span for each one of these pieces of content. So with all the various types of content out there, how do you get the attention of your audience with any single piece of content, right? So Tremaine, perhaps we can get your thoughts on this, given your work with digital agencies.
So I think producing great content can be quite subjective on many aspects. I think it's because content in itself is a creative piece of work, and we all view art and creative very, very differently. But at the heart of what it is, and I take this with me every day, is that what does your audience would like like to look, like to absorb, like to engage with. At the end of the day, I think specifically for social, for us, the power is in the audience's hands. It's no longer in the brand's hands anymore. We can push as much as we want, but then realistically, it is about them and what they like to see. So I think like a lot of brands, at the start of the social kind of boom, they struggled a lot with that, producing great content. So in my role, I have a lot of tools that help me. So thankfully, we've got like a lot of platforms and external help that we do get, so that we have the basis and foundation to create great content that our audiences want to see and watch and engage and consume. But obviously, on top of that, I work with a great brand that produces content daily in the masses. So I think for a lot of us starting out, and yeah, I'm very curious to see who's that person who said they don't struggle with producing great content. I'd like to check out your Instagram feed maybe and just let me have a look. Because maybe I can take a few pointers, and bring it to work with me for my guys. But yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, it is challenging. But the beauty of it is that when something does go well, you see the immediate reactions to something that's been produced.
Do you have a favorite go-to resource for creating content?
No, actually.
Okay.
I think that I think one practice that I do a lot with creating great content at the heart of it is people, right? So we do have a lot of brainstorming sessions and things like that. And actually, the one thing that I do use when I do try and get to some great ideas or great content is asking people who don't work on the current campaign I'm working on.
Okay.
Because that invites new ideas and new inspiration and obviously a new perspective. Sometimes when I'm in there, I can't see outside of it, and I need a different point of view, or someone that doesn't even work in the current industry. So that's actually where some of the best ideas do come from. And when that idea starts seeding, other people get inspired, and you see the idea kind of grow quite quickly, and that's really, really, really amazing.
Okay. Joe, your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe covered most of it, but I would say that nowadays everyone and their grandma is creating new content, so it's really, really difficult to stand out. I think one thing that I would advise when you're creating content is to go niche rather than too broad. For example, if I'm doing a blog piece on content marketing, there's everything under the sun. It's very difficult to stand out, very difficult to rank. So what I might do is content marketing in Singapore, or content marketing for the financial service industry. And I've seen that kind of content stand through the pack and also gain more traction in terms of viewership, in terms of engagement, because it is specialized. So don't be afraid to kind of go niche or more focused on the content you create, because you don't necessarily need to cater to everyone. I think going back to Tremaine's point, look at exactly who your audience is and create content for them. Because at the end of the day, no one really cares what you or your brand is saying. People only care about what they're interested in. So you have to look at it from that perspective and create content for them.
Okay. And Dan, given your experience in the B2B space, is it any different?
So I actually don't think creating content is very difficult. It's very hard. We all have the perfect publishing tool in our hands, right? Which is our mobile phone. It has a camera, it has a microphone. You write apps, you can actually have subtitles, and you can do filters and all those kinds of things. I think, to Tremaine's point, I think creating content for brands is hard, but creating content for yourself is easy. And I think when we look at those statistics you showed, it's quite clear that everyone can create content because there's just so much content out there. It's about whether or not you can create valuable content, which echoes what Joe said, right? Which is that make sure you have that level of distinctiveness with what you create, that it is something a little bit more special that it does stand out so it gains attention. And I think attention is one of those things you really should look to create. But I do feel for Tremaine creating content for brands because they can be incredibly tough and incredibly fussy, and it's decision by committee often. And when you are the only sole producer and you can create the content yourself with your mobile phone, you can be incredibly successful. And we think about those YouTubers who all they do is just set up a camera and away they go. PewDiePie's an example, right? And he has, how many advertising dollars off the back of that, and he has a bigger audience than any network cable television show, right? But he also understands his audience very well, and he's not trying to be all things to all people. He has a niche, and he really works that niche really well. So I think if you're trying to create content, I do think content is easy to create, but good quality content is actually much harder. And then if you have a brand on top of that, then it's impossible.
Well, slightly. Slightly.
But it is the challenge, right? It is.
Yeah.
I mean, you can speak from this firsthand. The negotiations and the runarounds, the multiple levels of approval you have to get in order just to get a simple piece of content off the ground.
Yeah, that's very right. I mean, I think that, so, I mean, it's very true. So when you're, I mean, that's also kind of like goes back to the problem of there's a sea of content out there. How do you stand out? So, and then brands get caught in that mess and sea of like things to see and things to do, and how do we then make sure our message is read, right? So, and then again, but then there's all the branding. So you can't speak like that because the brand is not like this. And then there's all these like, oh, you need to omit negative words, and then, hey, the colors are not right. So sometimes a really great idea can get distilled down to quite a really okay idea. But that's, if you work in the agency space, that's one of the biggest challenges you feel. So producing it is probably not the hardest part. The hardest part is getting the client to sign it off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's very true. I think in B2B we often have this problem of everybody creating the same piece of content. There's an exercise I run in a lot of my workshops, which is I get the client that I'm talking with, and then I get a whole bunch of posts from their competitors, and I just remove the labels. And then I give them a little exercise and say, tell me who created this piece of content. And they always get it wrong, because they all look the same. They all use stock images, they all use the same messaging, they all use the buzzwords, and they're all same. And I think the idea of identifying a niche and being very specific can really make you stand out and be much more successful. On tools, there's a couple of tools I really like. So Lumen 5. Lumen5.com is a really good one, so LUMEN number 5. It's a tool that can convert blog posts into video. So it's an AI tool, and it's free. The other one that I really like is answerthepublic.com. Sorry, Joe.
I was going to say,
I've got a
that
laundry
one's really
list, so
good.
I will stop
I just
after this
spoke with
one.
it about an hour ago, yes.
So
please.
answerthepublic.com is a great one for inspiration. So you basically put in a topic, B2B, blockchain, we'll just say, and it will spit out a whole bunch of different topic questions and frames that you can actually do. Again, another great free tool for you to inspire you if you want to own a specific topic and build yourself a strategy on different types of content to create. Any others, guys?
I actually go to you for my tools, so yeah. I evangelize Lumen 5 now with my clients as well, because this guy, so.
I use my analyst.
Canva is another one, right? Canva.com
yeah.
is always fantastic, especially for social media posts. They have templates for LinkedIn, they have templates for Instagram and for Snapchat. And then there's a Singaporean startup which is here. It's called Cloud9, CLAUD number 9, and that actually is full of Asian stock photos. So if you're ever working with a client that's a global client that loves to put a lot of white faces in their photography that doesn't render very well with other markets, this is a really good company that's really trying to deliver good quality photography and images for an Asian market.
Okay. Okay.
Google Analytics as well. Always Google Analytics.
Yes, Google
Sorry.
Analytics.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. So constructing on what's been shared, I think like the channel of choice for content marketing also has a huge impact, right? And strategies such as co-innovation with clients also is becoming highly successful in like 2019. So I would like to invite the panel to discuss some of your favorite content marketing stories, like with brands or like companies that have done great content marketing over the past 5 years or so.
Sure. So one of my favorite examples is out of Singapore. It's Frank by OCBC. I don't know if we could discuss this. So I've written a story about them, and what I think is quite unique about them is that it's very much, you know how traditionally banks speak in a very corporate, very stuffy way? Well, they removed all of that. Because Frank by OCB is geared towards most of you in this room, more youth-oriented, they actually, you can tell very vividly through types of messaging used, the visuals, it's like bright colors. They cut out all the jargon, no fluff. It's basically conversational, and they use a lot of you. They use a lot of millennial writers to create a lot of the content together. So they're bringing in the audience as part of the brand, as part of the story, and they've really created a platform that is, once again, what I was saying, for the audience, not so much for them. And I think that has helped them tremendously in terms of growing their brand awareness, attracting youth-oriented customers. So they're one of my favorite local examples.
I think, so I'm going to expand a little bit on content. So one of the a few brands that I do follow for social and content marketing in general is actually a global brand, KLM, an airline. They're one of the first pioneering brands that have used social and therefore social content marketing globally and very successfully. They've held entire content marketing campaigns just digitally and just on social and nowhere else. They're also one of the first and best ways of using chatbots and using all these things that actually interact with the clients, with the customers, not just locally but also globally. And they've launched many campaigns just off the back of one social Facebook content piece. So if you guys want to follow a brand, they're actually quite good. And if you talk to them on Twitter and stuff, they're very responsive, they're funny. They also do a lot of surprise and delight. One of the best campaigns I've seen ran is their search for ambassador. I think this was like 2-3 years ago. The entire thing was done through one piece of content that was launched, and then you interact with the chatbot. The greatest part about that was actually the fact that the chatbot talks to you like an actual human being. And back in the day, like 3-4 years ago, where this whole chatbot thing just kind of started up, like everyone was having issues just trying to create the conversation algorithms to speak to you like a normal person, but they nailed it so well. And they did find somebody, and it kind of ran all over the internet. So I thought they're one of the best brands in terms of following, in terms of all touch points of content marketing and social. Yeah.
I'll use a B2B example. So my favorite one, I think I've written about it many times. You can guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's The Wolf by HP Studios, and the reason why I like this one is it's not for obvious reasons. First off, it's quite clear that HP put millions of dollars into the production here. It's in the style of the television series Mr. Robot. It's about printer security. It stars Christian Slater, and it also stars Mike from Breaking Bad as the protagonist. But what I really like about it is the reason why they created it. So the whole topic is printer security, right? Which is not the most exciting topic at all. And it's obviously not the core topic for a IT decision maker or an IT DM. And so what usually happens is most brands who sell photocopiers and printers will just write blog posts and expert posts and those kinds of things about printers and the product itself. This takes a completely different tact where it says printer security is not the issue of the IT department. Printer security is the issue of everyone who uses the printer. Everyone who downloads something. So that means I need to create content that's going to be interesting to marketers, to salespeople, to CIOs, to CTOs. And so the idea is that they want to kind of turn the printer into the new water cooler in that respect. What happens is you watch this video, which is big production value, millions of dollars, stars, movie stars, that kind of thing. You then go in and you're printing something off the printer in the hallway, you say, hey, did you see this video? All of a sudden, people in the office are sharing this video around, gets back to the IT department, suddenly IT, printer security is suddenly on everyone's words, everybody's thinking, the IT department goes, maybe we should update our printers. And then they think about that and I go, okay, well, who am I going to think about updating my printer to? HP will be the #1 brand that they'll think of. So you think about how content has that really sort of online, offline effect here. The idea is to create buzz so that people talk about it, and you put it on the radar as part of your marketing to actually be in that top 3 consideration set for that core IT decision maker. Most people go very niche, and most people really try to create content that's designed for just that decision maker himself, who normally doesn't have time to be on social media, but they are highly influenced by the people around them, especially in the B2B space. And so HP's Wolf is really, really great. And it has been so successful for them that they have actually created a second series, and they created a 30-minute video, which was like a telemovie sort of thing. And they actually created another spin-off series, which was Mike from Breaking Bad, who actually then is the HP printer guy who's installing the printer to stop the wolf kind of thing, which isn't in the first series. So it's a very, very interesting campaign.
Okay. So, so we just spoke about, how do you, the difficulties with creating good content. So now say you have good content, you go ahead and you publish it. So how do you then measure content effectiveness? So in the survey before, the question was how do you measure effective content? And the options were traffic, engagements with content published, length of user interaction, leads generated or revenue generated, and don't know which one to pick, probably all. What do you guys think was fair?
I was going to say, what does everyone else think about that selection of metrics?
Yeah, it's limited, but out of those, which one do you think?
Mine wouldn't be in any of those. So my metric is subscribers.
Okay.
And I'll give you a reason for that. Content marketing is a different method to advertising. If you want to generate leads, sometimes content marketing isn't the best technique. The reason is, we often talk about this. Content marketing, the word was coined around 2018, not 18, which was designed, it was come out from a guy called Joe Paluzzi who was working in publishing houses. And basically what he saw was that the process of a publisher, and this, when I say publisher, I mean a television station, a magazine, a newspaper, the New York Times. They don't fill their pages full of ads about the New York Times, right? And if you want to actually take content marketing, the premise is that you have to act like the publisher, which means is you don't fill your feeds full of advertising about your products and your services. Instead, you fill it out with content that is interesting to those people that you're trying to attract, those target audiences. So, does that create sales? No, not initially, right? So the idea of content marketing then is that for you to build audiences. So you create the content, you attract an audience that you want to market to, and you use your advertising to market to them separately. Very different technique. But with content marketing, when you attract that audience, what happens then is then you need to think about ways you can actually monetize them in a different way. So an example would be BuzzFeed. So BuzzFeed themselves is very, very strong around their email lists. Right? They get all these email lists in, and people actually subscribe to get more content from them. And then what happened is they figured out how a way to monetize those audiences, not with advertising revenue on their website, but by selling them cooking utensils, because they actually saw that the people who subscribed to their cooking content really wanted to emulate those top-down cooking videos. Flat lays? No, I can't remember what they're called. But those top-down videos. So BuzzFeed now sells cooking utensils. They sell saucepans. They've diversified their business. The only reason they could diversify their business is because they had attracted an audience, which they then monetized with a new product, not trying to sell them the existing products. And so that is where content marketing is really different. So back to the metric. The value of content marketing is in getting those subscribers in. And then the second value of that is, in the future, trying to figure out a way to monetize them and then turning your content into a revenue system, not a cost system for the business.
So,
Mic drop. I'm out. See you later.
No, so with that, like most, like with the actual responses in the survey, the biggest pick was don't know which one to pick. Probably pick all. So we had a little scenario. So we're obviously a new club at SMU. So we faced this problem. So say there's one post, right? Post A, 25 likes, 5 comments, but no new followers. Right? And post B, 20 likes, 0 comments, but 5 new followers, right? So how do you...
It's a deja vu for me. You know, I get this question all the time from my clients.
Oh yeah? Okay, so I guess this would be an answer for us too. So where do you then, how do you start qualifying a post as successful, or which one would you say is more successful? Joe, do you want to...
Tremaine, I see Tremaine bubbling up over there. Let her blow up.
It's a very touchy subject here.
Tissue.
I think that actually it can be all of those or none of those in terms of the effectiveness metrics. I'm going to combine a little bit about what Dan said and also kind of like that, and also what's happening here is at the very beginning of this though, measuring effectiveness is all about objective. Why did you set out to do this in the first place? And that's the one thing I feel a lot of sometimes doing brand marketing specifically we forget, because as a brand we want to go, hey, because everybody else is kind of doing this, let's get on it because it is the thing. And then we go, okay, let's produce all this content and just put it out there and go like, well, how do we know it did well? And therefore, without context, this post A could do very well because it had maybe $0 behind it. But look, out of say 100 people on our channel, 25 likes were done. But then by the same context, it probably did very badly if we put like $100 behind it. But then it got only 25 likes. So and the thing is, I think there's a lot of all of those metrics are good hygiene measures of content in general. But at the core of it, we need to then measure what is it about this entire process that we're going through and what we're trying to get to. So then using Dan's point of view is that, on the brand side then is when we do a campaign, then it's all, the long run is about that. It's about making content work for you versus you working for that content at the end of it. But in between it is all this, and sometimes we lose sight of the end game. And focus so much on kind of like all these, is it the clicks, is it the engagement? All these are good ways to look at a piece of content, but at the heart of it is what were you trying to do with this piece of content or this campaign to begin with?
So say your like initial goal was like say with like both A and B, right? Say your goal was to meet 25 likes. So based off of that, Post A is done better. But if your strategy was to get new followers, then Post B is done better.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
it's depending on where you start.
Yeah.
Like what your strategy is, right?
I'll let you. Good job.
Yeah, all right. Jump back in the game. So I think Tremaine is absolutely correct. You need to look at your KPIs and objectives first, because only then do you know whether it was not successful. Big mistake that I see a lot of brands make is that they're very focused naively on just the numbers. So for example, the number of followers, the number of likes and stuff like that. But I always say, okay, for me, the quality of the engagement is more important. So is it people that are actually going to buy my products or services? Is it my specific target audience? I'd rather have 5 people that are, once again, in this example, convert to, say, subscribers that are potential target audiences, than 1 million people who just like it just for the sake of it. Because at the end of the day, it's not helping my business. So I think that's a big kind of thing that a lot of brands have to overcome and look at more in terms of the quality than what we call like vanity metrics. Just saying, okay, lots of likes, lots of
Shares, comments.
lots of shares, comments. Like, what is the actual impact that it has? I mean, it may make us feel good. It might look good in our presentation, but it's not going to essentially help impact the organization.
I think further to that, so something that we do a lot, I mean, I've done it for age, so like media monitoring and social media monitoring in general is the whole sentiment analysis of audiences. So a lot of people get caught up with like numbers, right, vanity metrics. So like, oh my God, we've got like 1,000, 10,000 comments, but what if 90% of those are negative? Do you know what? We don't go down to that level of actually analyzing what that is, because then that's very bad for our business in general. So sometimes I think, yes, brands get very, very caught up about this, and I think it's also then, as marketers, someone like myself, it's also in the education process of then going, what does this actually mean for my business and the impact it does for my business, and what can I do about it? Versus just going purely, hey, look at this, how well did this piece do? I mean, in today's world, you can't really, it's not like back in the day when social first launched and you can really just look at these numbers purely without context. Now there's so many more things. It could be, hey, maybe it was a Christmas holiday and therefore we gained no traction. Or hey, maybe it was a Christmas holiday and therefore your CTRs are so expensive, you know, and all the rest, right? So I mean, everything has to be taken in relation to the bigger picture and what you set out to do initially with your content pieces.
So I know you want to jump in. Can I jump in on that?
Go for it.
Okay. So I think, to Tremaine's point, I think look at seasonality, not looking at just one post, because you can't really base the success of everything on one post. Look at it as the larger kind of your content marketing efforts. Look at it from a quarter-on-quarter basis, a year-on-year basis. All of these will give you a better idea in terms of how it's doing, and you can get away from, like you said, things like seasonality and things that might skew the results, might get you excited, but then have you making the wrong decisions.
So, with regards to these two results, based on my rant earlier, you might think that I would say that the new followers is the one to chase here as success, and I don't believe so. And it's really because of the format you're on, which is a social media platform. So what happens on social media? Obviously, we know that the algorithm is devalued so that you pay more money to. And that doesn't happen on LinkedIn. But in general, the algorithm is better on LinkedIn. So you get more reach organically than any other platform. But besides that, we wouldn't encourage anyone on the LinkedIn platform to run follower campaigns. And the simple reason is because of that exact issue, is that it's rented land. You don't own the audience that's on that space. The whole goal of social media in general is for you to steal that social media's audience and bring it back to your own property with content marketing. So that way, if they actually feel like your email subscriber list, it costs you nothing to reach them again with a good quality email or a good quality WhatsApp campaign or whatever it is. So in general, every time you were trying to reach that audience, you actually have to pay again to kind of reach them. So followers is not a great way to use social media. The value of social media is the word social. You want it to be social. You want people to engage with the content and you want them to engage with it meaningfully. And all those metrics there, comments is the most meaningful one. You want people to actually feel passionate about something that they respond and they comment. I think if people tag in a comment section, it's not the great That's not what you want to encourage. There is a professor named Professor Mark Ritson, who I love. He has this line that he says, which is, in social media, the idea is for you to get comments as much as possible. And the best way to do that is to be controversial. And so you chase an algorithm split of 30% positive, 30% negative, and 40% neutral in your comment section when we talk about sentiment. All right? Now, a brand might want 100% positive. Well, what do you learn from that? The second thing about that is vanity metrics have a value, but it's not based on your ROI of performance of your campaign. The value of vanity metrics is in A/B testing. You can see you have two posts of the same, you put them out and you see one hits one, has more vanity metrics than the other. That can tell you moving forward that kind of content works better. And we do this at LinkedIn a lot, right? So we look at different types of images. So one with a human and one with a robot, for example, or a computer. And then what we do is we actually run that two campaigns at the same time, and then we look at those vanity metrics, which are signals for that this audience enjoys this content more. We often then make our alterations in the next campaign moving forward based on what these vanity metrics tell us. But we don't link them back to revenue, and we don't link them back to an ROI based on product or selling that way. That's the value of vanity metrics. It's, as long as you're running an A/B test with it, they're great signals to tell you what content works with the audience you're targeting straight away, and then you can replicate that for future campaigns.
Can I share a quick anecdote? It's not really related to this, but I think this is how Dan and I actually met, going back to the point about negative feedback.
Did I write something? I'm sorry, man.
No. So, Dan and I actually connected on LinkedIn, go figure. So I post a lot on LinkedIn, as you can probably tell if you're not following me already. And most people send very positive feedback. Dan was the one exception who positive but constructive feedback.
Open, honest, and constructive feedback.
So yeah, he was one of the first people that kind of challenged what I had said, and I think because of that, going back to what I was saying, it helped me learn, and it helped, I think Dan set out, and really establish the relationship. I think if he would have just been like, yeah, you're absolutely right, good job, like, it wouldn't have stood out in my mind, but because he took like a different approach, going back to what he was saying, it changed the relationship, and I think that is just a quick anecdote in terms of.
I don't remember that, Joe. I apologize.
I remember.
I'm not sure what I wrote. I've never met someone I've bandied on social media in person.
I haven't framed it by you.
You've been bottling that up for so long. All coming out now.
Where's the tissue?
Someone give that man water.
A little bit, right? It's okay, Joe.
Oh my goodness.
No, but it is, right. It's there's social platforms, and often what we have is a lot of companies put brand posts up where it's you shouting at the audience and saying, buy this, or do that. But really you want to encourage conversation. And if you want to see a company that does this really well on LinkedIn, it's Netflix. Netflix is fantastic at doing this. Actually, you know what? Twitter is not bad on their own Twitter feed. They constantly ask questions as a technique. So if you create content that's valuable enough to attract an audience, start asking them questions. The whole point of that value of that audience is the research you can get from them. And then obviously with that research, you figure out how you can monetize them better, make your advertising better, make build products that they want to have. The audience, the reason why you track those followers and those audiences is for research.
I think it's really, it's a shame that a lot of brands, I feel like a lot of brands in Asia are really not very good at adapting that strategy. So I have this thing where social media monitoring and also in feedback and stuff, social is the best way to get feedback because we are using the advantage of people sitting behind a screen and getting them to answer us truthfully and give us that feedback that we can do something about. But I do see a bit of a trend, like I think in Southeast Asia, that brands are really afraid to get that negative feedback because they don't know what to do about it. I'm like, well, you react to it.
No
right?
one cares. Honestly, if someone gets angry at your brand, it's over in 5 minutes because the next outrage is happening. And no one cares. Don't be afraid of bad feedback.
Yeah,
Because
it's
everyone's
true.
outraged on social media. It's kind of what the thing to do is on social, right? And I think
Go on a rant.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like the person who posted's literally forgotten about it as well. So like it's such a minor consideration that brands in general have to really get over. I don't know too many brands whose career's been destroyed by social media.
They haven't, yeah.
So tell me a brand whose
Yeah.
career's really been destroyed by social media. You might have had a controversy, but which
Yeah.
brand has gone out of business because of it?
And just, I think, expanding on to Dan's point, I think there's a common etiquette that should take place on social media. I think a lot of people forget that, just because we're texting someone I forget there's someone on the other side of the screen. So going back to Dan's point, a lot of brands think of social media. So for example, you meet someone at a networking event, and they just go on and on and on about themselves. and at no point do they ask you what you do, kind of find out about you. You get that feeling like,
Yeah.
would you want to actually, meet that person again? Would you want to have a relationship with them? Probably not. So why would you use the same kind of approach when you're kind of on social, just talking about you, what you're good at, what you're great at? No one cares. I think going back to Dan's point, it's about bringing them into the conversation, getting their feedback, whether it's positive or negative. You learn from the negative, but at least you're allowing them to express their voice and be part of the conversation, rather than just shouting at them.
Brands forget that they have to be a person on social, not just
Yeah.
a brand, and that's where they lose the plot, I would say, and have a conversation and negative, positive feedback. You're engaging the audiences. You're no longer, say, Nestle, the producer, whatever, the manufacturer, whatever. You're Nestle, a person. Yeah. So then because they keep thinking like a brand, therefore they everything that comes out there they approve also appears like a brand.
Yeah.
And I think that the whole point about this is that they get so worried about not standing true to that, or they don't have any other way to move forward. And I think that the one thing that I also find some brands forget is that, or brand marketers, is they are not the target audience, and that sometimes they need to step outside of that to then view it from the audience who is actually absorbing the content on those platforms, and then speak to them rather than speak at them. Yeah.
I think, going back to your point about like having a strong personality, I think it's one thing I do a lot in my workshops is think of your brand as an individual. What are the characteristics you would use to describe them? What is the tone that they would use? When you're creating content, think of it from that perspective rather than the brand, because a lot of times a brand is very abstract. I mean, it can mean a bunch of different things from a couple different people. But if you have like a person in mind and you're creating content on behalf of a person, going back to Dan's point, it's very easy for me as an individual to create content because it's just my voice. But if you get together with a marketing team or whoever is developing it and you create a person behind the brand, then it's much easier to have a unique voice, a unique tone that really sets you apart, because everyone else is talking very vanilla style, like they all sound the same. It's basically a robot just regurgitating what the other one said. But when you have that different perspective, looking at it from a person's point of view, it takes a slightly different approach to creating your own personality.
All right, so, okay. Thanks, Joe. So, that's a lot of information to absorb, but it's good. It's a good thing. So, okay, so we've reached halfway through the panel discussion. So we'll take a quick 5 to 10 minutes break and we will reconvene. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
This quality issue around content marketing. So according to the survey that we just conducted before, 98% of you think that quality should be prioritized over quantity. So up on the screen, I have a very interesting graph of when Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, bought over Washington Post. So he implemented a strategy of 1,200 posts per day. So that's quite a lot, if anyone was wondering. Alongside quality control tools such as Bandito, which was a tool which allowed editors to publish articles with up to 5 headlines, photos, and story treatments, with an algorithm that would then decide which one readers find the most engaging. As you can see, the results were very successful, and the number of the traffic for Washington Post increased greatly. Right? So this is just one example of a company that has focused on quantity, putting quality at a relative second. So, Joe, at this point, I have to admit that I have been stalking you on LinkedIn, as I mentioned earlier.
We all should be.
I promise I'll stop. So, correct me if I'm mistaken, but you're an advocate for less is more. Yeah? So, do you think that quality will always trump quantity as long as you select the correct marketing channels?
Thank you. So yes, I actually spoke about this the night before, because there's a big debate, like, how much content we should create. I always get that question. And I see brands actually creating too much content, too much mediocre content. And if anything, that has a detrimental effect on your brand. So what I would say is create less content, but repackage it, update. So a lot of the times it's more cost effective to take an old blog post that's performing really well, go ahead and update the figures, add some graphics, rather than creating a whole new one. So I think that's what I mean with less is more, is leverage what's already working for your brand. Just go ahead and update it, or if it's a blog, convert it into a video. So I do this quite a lot. Stole it from Gary Vee to some extent. He's a master at this. He takes a long form piece of content. So For example, it's a YouTube Live or a conference he's done, and he has his team break it up into different pieces of content, whether it's social posts, newsletters. So it's one way that he's able to create overwhelming amount of content, if not too much content, but it's in a way that utilizes his time and is able to get more bang for your buck, essentially.
Daniel, I think you had an opposing view to this.
You're wrong.
Ooh, gay bar.
Okay, so I am also an advocate for quality, but you can do both, right? You can actually have quantity and quality, and often quantity does win. So again, think about a publisher, any publisher, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the amount of content that one entity actually produces, and look at how successful they are around content. Where their content ranks on SEO, how easily they can get organic traffic and shares and everything else. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that they're consistently present with good quality content, but they have a lot of it. And so there's I don't know if everybody knows what the Pareto Principle is, which is 80% of the work. I think I'm trying to remember how it goes now. It's 20% of your success comes from 80% of your work or something. No, I'm saying that wrong.
80% of your success means 20% of your work.
That's right. 80% of your success comes from 20% of your effort and your work. And the reason for that is that there's going to be a lot of missed stuff. And often, in my experience, is I actually don't know really, and I can't guarantee which content is going to go viral and which isn't. I see this a lot in my feed. I've had a couple of posts go viral in the past, and they aren't the posts that I expected to go viral because they're not really the post that I felt was the most valuable to the audience, but they might have been a little bit more controversial or whatever it is and those kinds of things. So the word value is very subjective, and I think also you can easily equate that to quality. Quantity itself, I think with advertising, the purpose of advertising in general is all about you sitting in the top 3 consideration set for a customer. So when the customer moves from informational intent to transactional intent and they're ready to buy, you are one of those 3 that they do the research on. If you are not top of mind for them, you haven't done your job with brand awareness. And brand awareness only comes with frequency and repetition of that message, which means you have to have a shit ton of content to actually hit home with that message. One piece of content isn't going to usually be enough to convince someone to buy your product. The whole reason why people subscribe to content and subscribe to, say, your YouTube channel, it's not because of the content you created in the past, it's because the content you're going to create in the future. If you've ever subscribed to a YouTube channel where the YouTuber has stopped creating content, how pissed off do you get, right? And you're just like, hang on, I've come to expect this piece of content coming here. The reason is because that person's built up cadence of a level of content going forward over and over again and set your expectations. And the same happens with branding. So as soon as you stop creating content, or as soon as there is a gap between your presence on social media to your next campaign, in that gap, you lose market share. Your competitors come in and take your place. So then your next campaign, you're actually spending more time trying to win back the market share you lost because you couldn't be always on, because you couldn't actually keep enough content on the feed to keep people engaged. So I'm a big fan of quantity content, but I do believe that quantity, you can make good quality content at a quantity level, definitely.
So, once again, I was going to agree with you. I was trying to go adversary against you. But I would say, yeah, especially when the investment is larger in that B2B space, it requires more pieces of content for you to make a decision. For example, you're not going to sell like a $100,000 million deal because of one blog post. Very rarely. Even in my case, I asked my clients, how did you hear about me? And one client said, well, I read your Forbes article, then I saw your LinkedIn post, and I watched a video of you, and I did something else. So they were going through each of these steps. At no point do they say, okay, I stopped at the Forbes article, and then I immediately want to get in touch with you. There's a process that they take place. So going back to his point, there has to be a quantity involved in order for them to make that decision.
Yes, and just to hit on that, like the quantity has to be continuous. So it's not about, and we often see this with some of our clients, is they invest $1 million into a big, huge campaign, which runs for 6 weeks, and then they go dark for 3 months while they create the next campaign. And that is not the right mindset. Campaigns are a hangover of the print industry. They don't work on social media. The reason is because you would have a monthly issue that would come out every month. So you had 30 days to create that next campaign because there was no new content coming out with that magazine. It doesn't work in social media. In social media, the attention is always there, it's always running, and if you're putting something on Twitter, for example, it's gone in 3 seconds. What are you doing to replace it? How much content should you create? That is subjective. So, my advice on how much content you should create is usually as much as the last piece of content took to disappear. So if you have a piece of content that gives you engagement and traffic for 3 weeks, you don't need to create another piece of content during those 3 weeks. But if you have one that lasts for 3 hours, then you need to put another piece of content out there straight away. The idea is you have to be omnipresent. You have to always be available, always be present throughout the entire campaign. And so it's very hard for you to predict that. But over time, with A/B testing, with experience, you can actually start to learn how long a piece of content should last, and you can actually plan for that within your campaigns. Tremaine, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. I agree with both sides. I think the benefit of working in an agency and across multiple brands and types of categories and industries is that you get to experience both sides of this debate. Yes, there is a point in time where there's too much content, and yes, there is also a point in time where there's not enough content because, I mean, like what we discussed earlier, and Dan just mentioned it, there's a lot of content out there that is taking that space, and once you take yourself off that platform or off that visibility, another brand sweeps in, right? But then there's also things like where we talk about, say, media support, paid media support and things like that, where you can now control that algorithm. So I guess for brands who have invested heavily on social media buying, that's when you start really properly investigating how much money you put in there, how much you produce, your frequency caps, and etc. I mean, those can go on for ages, but at the base of it is then understanding the landscape and how much content do you need for that always on, making sure your audience is engaged in that cycle and taking them through that cycle. So like an attribution thing, like what Joe was saying, right? You don't make one decision based on that. Even for travel, where it seems quite straightforward, hey, I'm going to go to Bali, but you take a while to decide who you're going to fly with, when you're going to fly, where you're going to stay, at which platform you're going to use to book. So there's all these things that as a consumer consideration that you will do. And as any brand that wants to market on social media, you need to take yourself through that journey and decide at which point and how much content at that point do you need to produce and engage with them to then get them to that end point. So I don't think I guess it depends. So for someone like me, I am a very quick decision maker. I'm a creature of habit in terms of platforms I use and go to make decisions, but then I'm not the average kind of consumer, right? So I think brands need to kind of step into that and then decide based on testing, based on also learnings or benchmarking, and also obviously investigating, then decide for themselves at what point is enough or it's not enough. But I do see that the issue with a lot of brands is that they're so quick to get to that end point, trying to produce that one great piece of virality that will then lead them to that end point. But it's never really that simple because yes, the audience's attention is 3 to 5 seconds, and after that it's done, and then you got to think of the next thing that engages them. But if you do produce a great piece of content, then they're engaged for the 5 to 10 seconds. You know what, you've got them. So this is working. What do I serve them next to keep them? Keep that attention span for longer than the 15 seconds, and you move on and you move on and you move on. So I think that's something that brands actually have to invest in to investigate to see what is going to work for you.
Okay. So to sum it up, that's okay. Just scream. So to sum it up, you have to reach you can't just prioritize quality over quantity, right? You have to reach a certain amount of quantity.
You can have the most valuable content ever created, but if nobody sees it, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So the quote that I love about that is, content is king, but distribution is queen, and she wears the pants. Right? And so the idea is that you need to have a good quality distribution strategy, which means you need to get eyeballs, which means you need to go after the reach, which means you need quantity of audiences, and then you also need to have quantity of content to keep them engaged. I'll leave it at that.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Dan. So the last question I should like to ask the panel is to tie the bow on the discussion. So we've looked at creating good content, measuring good content, and content publishing or distribution strategy. So, however, at Avente, our cloud, we target SMEs that have a very limited budget and, as a result, a very limited focus on their marketing funnel. So content marketing obviously looks at the top half of the funnel, which is intent and other things.
Good answer.
It's not the conversion part, right? So what advice would you have for a Singaporean SME or a student working for a Singaporean SME to identify the low-hanging fruits and to really display the potential of a content marketing strategy? Because many of the SMEs that we've worked with, they don't realize the possible potential. So, yeah, what advice would you have?
You want me to start?
I'll go ahead since I can turn your mic. So one thing I tell SMEs is to leverage your most powerful resource. What do you think that is?
Science.
I was going to say your people, but yes. Leverage your people. So my previous organization did this very well, in that they turned everyone in the organization into content creators. So they had a competition every month to say, okay, you have to create one piece of content every month. And then they had a leaderboard in terms of how it performed. But they weren't strict, and they'd say, okay, you had to do blog posts, you had to do video. What they did very well is they gave everyone the option to create whatever format worked best for them. So some people were more skewed toward design, so they would create slide shares or infographics. Some people enjoyed writing, some people enjoyed speaking, so they did videos. So there was this good mix of different content they were creating just from internally, so they didn't have to outsource any. And it worked quite well because, one, they understood the business better than anybody else, and two, they were very passionate about the brand and what they were doing, so the content they were creating conveyed that. So that's one. The second thing I would do is invest a lot of time in terms of optimizing your headlines and your thumbnail images for videos in order to drive organic reach and traffic. Because a lot of the times people will just click, they'll see a headline and they'll see a video and an image, and that's all they'll see. But if enough people are clicking on that, it's an indication to Google, it's an indication to YouTube and other platforms that people want to see this. So it's going to help with the rankings, it's going to help with awareness and reach organically. And then later than that, you can pump some money into it, but I always say find out what works first organically before you put any money into it.
Okay, but in some cases, they don't even have like a channel. Like we worked with a safety consultancy company, and they didn't have, they had a LinkedIn page, which they hadn't used in like ever.
Yes. Tell them to come talk to me.
So they didn't have an Instagram. I can't remember if there's a Facebook. I don't think so. But so where they did have a Facebook, but then again they hadn't used that either. So where do they start? Like how do you go about identifying which channel do you pick?
So that one is always an easy one for me. I mean, it's a difficult question for a lot of people, but ask your audience. What channel are they on? Where do they spend their time? What type of content are they consuming there? Put your efforts there rather than trying to guess and try to put yourself in every specific channel. Because I see a lot of organizations doing that. They see, okay, Snapchat or TikTok, it's new, we have to be on it. But I always ask myself, is your audience really on that? I used to use this example when I wrote for Forbes of the Forbes syndrome. So everybody wants to get into Forbes. Everyone and their mama wants to get into Forbes. But I always ask them, is your audience actually reading Forbes? Or are they reading, National Geographic? Or are they reading something else? Just because you're in there and nobody in your audience is reading it, once again, it goes back to vanity metrics. It's going to make you feel good, but it's going to have no impact on the organization. So always ask your audience and find out what channels they're on.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. I think that especially as SMEs, sorry, should I be using the mic? I think especially as SMEs, where you strive for resources, etc., and starting with your audience and actually with your people are the best two starting points, because one, you want to make sure that every effort you have is actually reaching that one right audience versus spreading that effort across multiple touch points and maybe getting one person to look and read at your content. You understanding your audience and how they absorb content and then forming a strategy around that would save you a lot of the pains and aches. Hey, because my competitor is on this, but why would you want to go into a space where your competitor already is? Then you're doubly competing against yourself. So start with where they're going to be, what they're going to absorb, and then go from there. And then use your own people to market your own product. Because if you work for the organization, you're clearly passionate about what you're doing. And actually, people, your resources on any given scale of organization, brands, etc., are your best resources. The best marketing will come from those people because they're the ones that are promoting the lifestyle of the brand, of the experience of what you're doing and the products you're selling, and they're the best first stop that you should actually make as a small organization.
I like that. I like that anecdote. There was one a client in Australia that I consulted with, who was just about to launch this massive campaign celebrating that they were 100 years old. Nowadays, being an old company is not hip. You think about all the more popular companies around that have been around for less than 20 years, right? Like popular companies that young people want to work for or that are attractive to customers are young companies, you know. And literally the question we asked them was like, why? Why are you investing all this work to this massive promotion, talking about yourself and about how old you are? Do you ask your audience if who cares? Like, oh, why did you go with this company? Oh, because they're 100 years old. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's a typical example of where the marketing team or the company itself got so obsessed with itself that it didn't understand what its audience would value. In the meantime, its competitor was taking a ton of market share off them because they were giving them content that was much more valuable and was really based around what that audience wanted. With a strategy, it's an interesting one because there's a lot of different factors to strategies. I absolutely agree with what Joe and Tremaine have said, which is audience first. Always start with the audience and then start with those goals that you need to achieve off the back of this. One of the things I would also question is work with format last. So often you might go, hey, we've got $10,000 to spend on a video campaign. Why video? Like, why is that the request here? Does your audience consume video? Is that the best way to do it? And so really I think what all three of us are advocating is do some research. It's the lost art of marketing that no one does anymore. Research, research, research. You should be able to convince your boss, your senior marketer, whoever it is that you are reporting to or that you're managing, that research needs to be done before money is spent. And if you don't know why you're spending that money or where you're spending it without having data to back it up, you haven't done your work as a marketer. So research always first, and that's researching your audience, that's researching the channels that you're going to distribute on, it's researching the topics and the pillars that you're going to create for. And the only other one that I have as tactics is learn how to use Google Analytics. It'll make your life so much easier when you can prove shit. Like, it really does. Sorry, LinkedIn Live for swearing. But it really does. If you can understand the data and understand where the audiences are and the traffic and how to set up goals in that place, and Google Analytics, it's not enough to install it. It's a vanilla tool. It's designed to be customized. You have to customize it. And every SMB marketer needs to know as a core competency skill. Everyone in my team has to take the GIQ exam. Whether or not they use Google Analytics every day or not, they need to do it because it's just an essential tool for a digital marketer these days. So I would encourage you to get yourself certified on Google Analytics, or if you're using Adobe, do it on Adobe.
So just to expand on that point, I think absolutely research data, looking at that, but also speaking to people. I think as a society, as a people, we get so used to like texting each other, we forget to speak with each other. So a lot of the times when I'm creating content strategy and I'm asking questions within the organization, I purposely remove the marketing and people from the room. I speak specifically with the sales and customer service teams. Why do I do that?
Know the customer.
They know the customer. Yeah, they are speaking with the customer on a regular basis. They have more interactions with them than anybody else. They know why they love the brand, why they hate the brand, which is a very important thing to understand. Combine those interactions, those insights from your customers or prospects with the data to create a very powerful strategy.
And using audience listening tools, I believe, asking customers directly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so apart from Google Analytics, are there any other tools that you think students should pick up if they're trying to be the next digital marketer, next great digital marketer?
I can recommend reading. So if you want to know more about content marketing, there's a book by Joe Paluzzi and Robert Rose called Killing Marketing. It was published 2 years ago, I think it is. That's a really good book to look at. They even have another book called Content Inc., which is designed specifically for SMBs. So think about that one, Content Inc. INC. If you want to do more university-style education training at a fairly affordable level, I quite like Mark Ritson's mini MBA that he runs. I think it costs about $1,600. That's all, and it's a 12-week course, and it shows you just all the basic old-school principles of marketing that really set you up, the 4 Ps and everything else, and it's still very applicable for digital in a lot of ways. And the only other book that it's a bit of a heavy read, but I do encourage a lot of marketers to think about, is How Brands Grow by Professor Byron Sharp, which I quoted earlier tonight. He has a different tactic to Professor Mark Ritson, but I think he's more about why mass marketing works for digital rather than why niche targeting and hyper-targeting work, which is very counter to what the actual regular textbooks teach you. And I think it's good to be challenged. So I think you really should look at other people's opinions and other ways to do marketing. It makes you a much more robust, agile marketer in the future, for sure.
Yeah, I was just saying, if you're tired of reading books, which I'm sure most of you are, just go ahead and follow Daniel on LinkedIn. That's where I get a lot of my source of inspiration from as well.
No, don't.
I think we touched on a really good point. Reading. I think a lot of us get absorbed in, like, just say on social, we read other people's content, but we forget actually reading, and that's actually really, really valuable. It's really funny. I think in Australia there was this ad show. What was it called? There's a I can't remember what the name of the book now, but if it comes to me, I'll send it to you. But I think we forget to actually properly read content. I mean, the best thing about being digital nowadays is that the world is at your fingertips. There's so much publications out there. You know, like, so I use this thing, I think it's all not like Flipboard. I subscribe to a lot of things, and that's my bedtime reading.
Okay.
And you just open your mind about, and the thing is, you really can access data from all over the world, and you're really missing out if you're just reading like people's social feeds, etc. And that's actually one of the main sources of how do you know where the best content marketing examples are out there, you know, by reading. And the thing is, because it's digital, it can be from any part of the world, and you can be the first to bring it here or first to look at it and learn from those people that have made it or have made mistakes, you know. And that's something that I feel we don't do enough of reading. You know, it's invaluable actually.
Just a question that you might want to pose to the audience. I'm interested to know about what is the biggest challenge you might be having in here. Is it around content strategy? Is it around content creation, content distribution, or content measurement? Because they're all very, very interesting conversations to have, and I don't want to derail the questions you might already have. But if anyone has those questions, I'm more than happy to sort of explore that with the panel here. I think that would be really interesting to see.
We have a couple of questions on Quick to View. But to sum up what we said, so do your reading, don't forget to research, and get your Google
Analytics
license.
Analytics certified, for sure. And the same thing with Facebook, right? If you use Facebook a lot, take the Facebook Blueprint course, right, and get yourself certified in any of the tools. Like, just like these are core competencies that are also not only good for your day-to-day job, but good for your career. Like, it makes you highly more employable as well, and you can move into companies quicker.
And once you have those licenses, you suggest we put it on our LinkedIn profile, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want to see it, we want to hear about it, and we want you to shout it from your rooftops. We want to know about all the great credentials you've got. Oh, let's LinkedIn Learning is fantastic as well, by the way. I just want to
Plug that.
Yeah, so jump into LinkedIn Learning and Linda. That's a fantastic course to do any kind of digital marketing.
Okay, so now we're gonna open up to audience questions. So the first one's from Peter.